Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. In this video, I will be discussing about class and object, and also I will give an example of class, an example for object, how to create an object, how to call methods and attributes of an object, and also we will be discussing about the difference between class and object. So let's get started first. When we want to discuss about class and object, one thing that we should know that this comes under OOPS concept or object-oriented programming language concept. So as we know that in object-oriented programming language concept, we are more focusing on object. For example, if we want to write a program or a project for university, so inside university, one of the most important object that we have is the student. So we know that a student, for example, Karim, Ahmad, they're all students. So how we will write a program based on them, we will see that when we are thinking about a student object, we see what a student can have. For example, what we will store of a student in our database. We know that the student can have a name, student can have an ID, student can have father name, age, date of birth, address, marks. So these are all things that a student will have. So we are calling them as attribute. So you will see when we are going to write a program for a student, we will store these things about student. And then we will think what student can do. So when we are writing a program for a student, what a student can do with this program. So we know that student can give exam, student can pay the fee, student can study, student will attend exam, so a student will get their attendance. So these are things that student can do. So that's why they are called as a behavior of a student. So that's why when we are thinking about OOPS concept or object-oriented programming language concept, we were focusing on object, which each object will have attribute that we will store them, and behavior or nothing but methods of every object. So let's get started with one of the most important pillars of object-oriented programming language concept, which is class. What is class? We will say class is nothing but a blueprint or a template for creation of an object. Whenever we want to create an object, so we will have some definition of object, that what is an object has or what an object can do. So this template is called a class. So we know that every class will have attributes and methods. So attributes are like name of student, for example, address of a student, ID of a student, mark of a student, and the methods, for example, paying the fee, attending the exam, studying. So they're all the behavior of a student. So let's get started with defining a class or syntax of a class. If you want to define a class, what can we do? The first thing that we need to do, we need to use the keyword class. For example, if I want to create a class, the first thing that I need to use the keyword class. And then after that, I have to give a name for this class. For example, I want to make a class for student. So let me give a name as a student. So this is, we know that when we are giving a name should define that object clearly. So I can give any name, but the student is better. So this is the name of my class. And after that, the body of class. So when I write this colon, after this, the body will start. So you know that this is Python and we need indentation. So the body of class, whenever you're writing a code with this much space or one tab space, that are called as a body of class. So let me clearly, so this, for example, I will say this is the body of class. So if you're writing a code like this will all be called as a body of class. So now let's go and see that, as I told you, that each class may have attribute and each class may have behavior. So now just we have given a name for this class and we have not defined anything inside this body. So let's go and get some attributes for this student and also some methods for this student. So we know that whenever we want to define, for example, class for a student, so this student may have some attribute. So how we will define its attribute? We know that in each class we will have a constructor. Constructor means what? Whenever we are creating an object for this class, so this constructor will be responsible to initialize the value of object. For example, if you want to register a new student, so a new student will have a name. We have to give a new name for him, new ID for him, for example, new address for him. So this is actually inside program. This responsibility is given to the constructor. So how can we do create a constructor inside Python? Inside Python, the constructor name is init. So this is always our constructor name. So whenever we want to create a constructor, we will say just like this: define and then init. Now here inside the bracket, we need to give all the attributes of a class, an object. For example, the first attribute is always self. So we will later discuss about this self. This self is looking like it is like a pronoun for the object. Later on, we will discuss about the self. We know that every student may have a name. This is its first attribute. May have an, for example, ID number. This is the second attribute of each student. The third one will be address. So it may have different attributes, but in this example, we have given only three attributes for each student. And later on, we will say whenever you want to create an object. So this will be the first method which will be called. So at that time, we have to give a name, we have to give an ID number, and we have to give an address for this student. So that's why we will say self.name is assigned a name. So this self will be just directly, or it will be pointing to the object that we are creating. Later on, once I will create an object, I will this clearly self. I will speak about this self more, and then I will say that self.id number is nothing but id a number, and then I will say self.address is equal to address. This name, this id number, and this address is taken from here. So if you are writing here n, here also you can write n, there is no problem. Here if you're writing I, you write here on, there is no problem. But this name, this ID number, and this address is the attributes of our object. So we will say our object has name, has ID number, and has address. So but here when they are the name or the parameters of this constructor. So if I write name here, also I can write n here, there is no issue with that. So let me write name. So this is nothing but our constructor. We know, and we in this class has three attributes: name, ID number, and address. So let's give a method for this student also. For example, this student will study. So this is a method. The behavior of this student will say define. You know that inside we have to write our code inside the body of this class. That's why we have to start from this. We should not start from this part. So that's why we'll say define study. And when you are going to write a method for the class, you have to have one parameter called the self. This self is not keyword. You can write s also, but you must have one of this attribute, because where you want to call this method, you will call it using an object. So this self will represent that object. So later on we will discuss about this more. So now we will just write like this print. We will say here, I'm going to write format in the string, so that's why I will write self.name. After that I will say is studying. Self.name is studying. So what does this self means? Self means any object who is calling this attribute, his name must be printed here. So later on we will discuss. Now if I want to say class is a blueprint, what does it mean? It means if you want to define a student, what is a student? We will say a student is a person who has a name, ID number, address, and he is studying. So this is our definition for a student. That's why it is a template. This is class. So now the second topic that we need to discuss is instantiating or creating an object. So how can we create object from this class? We know that this is a template. So how can we create objects from this? If you go above, we have here a definition for object. Object is nothing but example of class. So you will say a student is a person who has a name, who has ID number, who has address, and who is studying. So a person will say, give me an example of this student. So surely we have a lot of students. So we will say one of the students. The first object we will create, for example, how to create an object. Whenever we want to create an object, the first thing that we need to give is the name of class. So using name of class, we can create an object. And then we will see whenever we are going to create an object, we need four parameters: self, name, ID number, address. So whenever a student wants to register, we have to provide his name, ID number, and his address. And what is the self? This self is now object one. Means this self is a pronoun for object one. Now we are referring for object one. That's why we are not going to give anything about it. So first we will object one will be stored inside self, and for name we will give, for example, Jamal, And then for ID number, we will give some ID number, for example, 1BO100. And for address, for example, we'll give Kabul. So this is three attributes that we have given. What does it mean? When we are calling a student, directly this method will be called. Object 1 will be stored inside self. Jamal will be stored inside name. This 1B100 will be stored inside ID number, and Kabul will be stored inside address. So what will happen here? It will come like this. Object 1 dot name is equal to Jamal. Object 1 dot ID number is equal to 1BO100. Object 1 dot address is equal to Kabul. So this Kabul will be stored inside this address. So this is how we are going to create an object. This is how we are creating an object. So we can create, let me discuss here, is say it's a student is not defined since we have not run this class. So now this is also problem, this issue is solved. And after that, this was something that we were able to create an object. We can create multiple objects. For example, I can create the second object also. There is no issue with this. So I will say object number 2. So the object number 2 will be some person, for example, Kamal, and his ID will be, for example, 200. What will happen whenever you are going to create an object? This constructor will be called. Now object 2 will be stored inside self. Kamal will be stored inside name. 1BO200 will be stored inside ID number, and Kamal will be stored inside address. Here it will come like this. Object 2.name is equal to Kamal. Object 2.id number is equal to 1BO200. Object 2.address is equal to Kabul. So this is how it will be stored inside memory. So we will have one specific location for storing this one, and another specific location for storing this object. Now the third concept that we want to discuss, how to access attributes of objects. So we have two objects, object 1 and object 2. Whenever we want to access attributes or methods, so we know that, for example, object 1 and object 2, they have three attributes: name, ID, number, and address, and they have one method called study. So how can we access study? For accessing them, we can use the name of object and then dot notation and then the name of method or attribute. For example, I want to say for object 1, I want to call the study behavior or study method. So I will say object 1 dot study. So what will happen? This object 1 now will be stored inside self. So self is a pronoun for object 1 now. It will come here. It will say object 1 dot name. What is the name of object 1? Jamal. It will come. Jamal is study. It will be stored like this. So let me come here and run it again. So whether it is correct or not. See, Jamal is studying. If I write like this, object 2 dot study, what will happen? Now object 2 will be self, or self will be the pronoun for object 2. What is the name for object 2? Kamal. It will come. Kamal is studying. So let me run this one also, whether it's giving this answer or not. So it's saying object 2 is not defined because whenever I have created this, but I have not run it. So let me come here and run it again. Yeah, Kamal is study. And how can we access their attributes? In the same way. For example, I want to know the name for object 1. I will say object 1 dot name. It will print the name for object 1. I will print object 2 dot name. It will print the name for object 2. So this is how the class and object is going to create. So if a person is asking now, what is the difference between class and object? We will say class is going to be a template. What does a template means? If a person wants to know us, what is a student? We will say a student is a person who has a name, who has ID number, who has address, and who is studying. So this is a definition of us for a student. This is a template of us for a student. So if a person is asking, give me an example for this student, I will say Jamal is a student, he is an object. Kamal is another student, he is another object. So any example that we can give for this definition, they are all objects. So this was the end of the video. Thanks for watching.